Well, it's all downhill from here. Well, thank you for having us. I'm joined by our CFO, Bob Meister. So I want to begin with some thank yous. Certainly, thanks to Bob and his team for doing such deliberate and thoughtful work throughout this process. It really is a year-long process, and we'll kind of walk through some of that for the general public. But I also want to thank the county Board of Supervisors, as well as Matt Harris and his team, certainly Dr. Casey. There are many conversations that are had. I've been in this work in this county for 21 years. I don't recall a time where I have felt or seen such a display of togetherness, not just in this process, but over the past 8 months, just more broadly speaking. So thanks for that. And we'll jump right into the budget. Did you change the slide deck?
It changed.
Oh, here I am. All right. Did you want to hit the executive summary, and then we're going to tag team this, folks.
Happy to hit the executive summary. So sorry for the smaller font there, but hopefully you guys can see it. You hear a lot of us discuss a $1 billion budget here in Chesterfield County for our schools. You can see that in the second bullet, just over $1,070 million when you include all of our funds. We're going to spend most of the time here today, though, talking about that first line, that $986 million. That's our ongoing operating fund. The difference between those two is our grants and our food service funds. Obviously, a lot more in the news recently about those two funds as you think about the higher percentage of those being federally funded. I'll echo Dr. Casey's remarks from the intro on that. We don't know what we don't know. We're going to monitor that closely and carefully. In addition to our operating fund, you also see a pretty robust CIP package here. Happy to say that these are all the projects that we've been talking about for several years. We did not add anything new this year. We know that inflation is a real thing. We know that we've got a lot of great projects underway, so there is some uncertainty in terms of timing and affordability as we go out through the end of our plan, but we are continually working with both county staff, our own staff, to find those locations, find the funding to make sure we complete that list. The last item I'll note here before I turn it back to Dr. Murray is please keep in mind that the school budget is a work in process even at this point. Yes, we've gotten through a school board approval, but as you know, this just kicks off your process, which is a significant source of funding, as well as the state process, which is over half of our funding comes from the state. The governor came out with his proposal. The General Assembly came out with their proposal relatively recently. We feel good about what's in the General Assembly proposal versus at least what the governor proposed, but those are by far not finalized. There'll be additional discussions on that. The General Assembly will get back together after the governor puts his pen to it in early April, and we'll have to almost certainly come back and revise this for that information, but we are excited to present what's here today for you with the understanding that the state numbers may still move.
All right, so nothing new for the folks sitting around the table, but for everyone else, we're going to walk you through what our codified expectation is, and that is to present a needs-based but also a balanced budget. I will say that if you attended any of our town halls, you're going to notice some positive changes. At our town halls, we talked about the scope of our need as well as the scope of our horizon of wants in 3 buckets: what we could afford right here and now, what we needed to afford but didn't have line of sight to those dollars, but now we feel comfortable we do, and then some bigger picture, longer term goals that are very important for us to keep our eye on and continue to make progress toward meeting those goals. For the larger public, I mentioned our budget is a year-round process. For the sake of talking in school years, late summer, early September, we began dialogue with our internal staff, talking at the chief level, our directors and others to present to us what we call white paper initiatives. What do we need to perform at a higher level? Those could be staffing needs, those could be programmatic enhancements, those could be replacement cycles, et cetera, et cetera. From there, we await the governor's proposed budget, which came in very slim to the tune of $12 million of new money for Chesterfield at the time. And that's when we had to start making some tough considerations of what we could afford and what we needed to reach between the couch cushions, as we like to say, and try and find some loose change to fund multi-million-dollar initiatives and needs. From there, we go into our town hall process and really solicit community input and feedback. Along the way, I should say that our school board advisory groups are meeting and making recommendations to our board for our budgetary consideration. You'll see some of their recommendations and work honored and represented in some later slides. Before ultimately Bob and I present our final proposed budget, which we did to the school board earlier this month, and have sent it over to our friends here, and we're happy to meet and present this to you. I appreciate Dr. Casey's comments on the JLARC study, because that indeed is where our fingers should point, and point often. Chesterfield County remains roughly $250 million underfunded, according to that commission. Going back to the white paper initiatives I mentioned, they totaled coincidentally
Just under 300.
just under $300 million. That would more than satisfy all of the compensation studies, all of the programmatic enhancements, all of the staffing needs that we just can't afford because the state isn't coming to our aid. So this slide says we do it anyway, and people choose to move here because our schools remain premier, even in the absence of a significant funding shortfall. This is a bird's eye view of some of our high-level accomplishments. I won't read them off to you, but from elementary to graduation, our students are attending award-winning schools or participating in award-winning programs. I should have said pre-K to graduation, because we're very proud of our CECLA as well. Look forward to expanding that. This is our 9 slide where we highlight how large Chesterfield is. A lot of times we forget, being a bedroom community, and we do so well at making the big feel small that we forget how large, in fact, we are. We are one of the 65 largest school divisions in the country, one of the top 5 in the Commonwealth. And so our bus drivers drive over 9 million miles a year. Our food service serves over 9 million meals a year. Our custodial crew cleans over 9 million, or right around 9 million square feet per year. And that is kind of how we arrive at the need of a $1 billion operation. Arguably, it needs to be much higher than that. And then the infographic that you might struggle to read without a monocle is showing you exactly where the percentage breakdown of our dollars are spent, with the largest portion in blue there, obviously going to instruction. We create pathways for our students that meet the personalized need or desire of families and their children. So we offer a robust online menu, either through CCPS Online or virtually through our K-8 virtual school, which was the first in Virginia. If you have struggled with addiction and you are in recovery, we have a home for you at our Chesterfield Recovery Academy, which was the first in the Commonwealth, which will now, using Chesterfield's Canvas, be re-implemented in 3 other divisions around the Commonwealth. We have our Chester Early Childhood Learning Academy, where we're meeting the needs of 3- and 4-year-olds, making sure that they are ready for life in kindergarten. And our data, as we have begun cohort tracking, shows that they are performing higher than their grade level complement at the first and second grade level, and our award-winning CTC campuses. And I mentioned that because today we begin our move into Springline Drive, where we are consolidating both of our central office camps, and that will give way to 650 new CTE seats in the next year and a half. So we're excited about that. We prepare our students for life beyond high school. We're pretty proud of our 91% graduation rate. We'll be prouder when it goes higher than that. But our students participate in nearly 30,000 work-based experiences before graduation, earning almost 9,000 career industry certifications, and prepared for the rigors of college, if that is the pathway they choose, by completing over 24,000 college credits. But Bob and I don't create this budget by ourselves or prioritize the needs alone. Certainly, we rely on other division staff and their departments of oversight, as well as our school board advisory groups, as I mentioned previously, and the community feedback, as well as our school board. Anything I missed, Bob?
Fantastic. I think you've done this once or twice. Thank you, Dr. Murray. I'll carry the ball forward here. As we think about the school budget, the first thing we always have to be mindful of are those mandates and requirements. Those often show up in terms of unfunded mandates from the state. I know we've had many conversations over the years about what those look like. The go-to example that we've historically used is when they claim they offer a 3% raise as an example. That really trickles down to Chesterfield County is about half of that being funded by the state, and the rest of that needs to come from the county in that case. That's not the only place where that happens. It just happens to be the easiest example. As we go through this deck, you'll see uses for new money. Most of them are going to fall in this camp of mandates and requirements, or quite frankly, inflation. We'll look at that through that lens as we go. But the other half of this is also important, and that's the need to maintain that high level of community expectations. Here's where you see unique programming, staffing above those SOQ levels, things like that. The example we had earlier today is a great example of that, of the specialty programs and things that we can do when we invest differently that aren't necessarily state requirements, and what a great example that was just a few moments ago on that. So with all that in mind, enrollment is also a big deal. We've come to you over the course of time and talked about accelerating growth. Good news is that slowed a little bit here, which is great to see. This does still assume our models, Stratus models, both align on about 1,400 new kids between roughly last year and 2029, the end of our sort of 5-year horizon. So still growth, slower than we've been projecting. Happy for that, as it gives us an opportunity as we think about the CIP and other places to catch up. This year's growth is relatively flat, just a little bit over 100 to 200, depending on the point in time where you do the math. Still growth. Not all the counties in the Commonwealth are growing. It's great that we are still one of them. You don't want to be on the other side of that and shrinking. That comes with other challenges, but I'll take slow, modest growth any day, and that's what we see going forward. So here's where the money meets the road. Here's our overall picture of the roughly 1.07 billion funds. Again, 986 of that is in our operating fund, 38 within grants, 42 within food service. I'll talk mostly operating from here, but I will pause on this grant bucket for just a moment. Of that 38 million, roughly 30 of that is some form of federal grant, whether that be IDEA, the various titles, Perkins, those type of things. We are actively monitoring what's happening in Washington and making sure that we stay attuned to that. This reflects as if those programs continue. Should something change, we'll certainly adjust to that, but this assumes those change. No change. What you do see here is a minus 1.2 million in this line. This is from a specific decision that the school has made to shift away from a certain pre-K program called Head Start that is federally funded and shift over to a different but equally viable program called VPI that is state funded, a little less regulation, roughly the same funding level. So you'll see that as a swap in and out of our grant fund, which is why you see that actually being reduced this year. No major story in food service. Food continues to get expensive. But from here, we'll talk about that roughly 4.5% increase in operating and where that money goes. Again, mostly toward compensation and those requirements. So where does that There we go. Where does that money come from? Obviously, a big portion of that comes from the folks here. That county funding of just over 40%, a little over $400 million of funding in ongoing operations is assumed in this budget. Thank you to Mr. Harris for the early read on what is likely that transfer. This reflects a $15 million increase in ongoing transfer from the Board of Supervisors in this budget. We hope that that stays as we go forward. The other big piece of this pie is obviously that state funding. That's the $57 million or just over $560 million of funding from the state. Here's where I could talk JLARC. I think that point has been made once or twice, so I'll just leave it at that and say there's about $560 million from state funding reflected in this budget. And again, this is reflective of the General Assembly's budget assumptions, still subject to the red pen of the governor. So should things change, we'll need to come back and revisit that. Where do we spend this money? Needless to say, the bulk of this is in instruction. You see just under $700 million here is directly pointed towards instruction. And I would argue most of the other pieces of this pie are also very much pointed towards instruction, whether that be transportation, maintenance, technology, things like Chromebooks to put on their desk, and of course debt, being able to afford the mortgage payments on our existing CIP program that's already out in the field and that debt burden that's out there. So $987 million, $42.8 million increase. Those are the numbers we're going to talk about as we dive in. So where did that $42.8 million come from? You see here state revenue of about $28.7 million. Three things in there. The governor's original assumption of $12 million. That was primarily to fund their half of the 3% raise, about $10 million, and about $2 million to fund ELL growth. The next 15 or so is from General Assembly action recently. Primarily the removal of the support cap that we've been anxious to see for some time. That's a little over 12 million of this, as well as some additional funding to support special education. And as we go into where we're spending, you'll see that is definitely a need. And the remaining dollars is that swap from Head Start to VPI that makes up that just under 29 million of state funding. You see the county money here, we split it up into two pieces, 15 million in total, 13 million for sort of ongoing new work, another 1.85 to support the lease payment on the Spring Line building. Really great to have that building, excited to move in there for all the advantages it's going to offer to our administrative staff, but it's really about clearing that instruction space at CTC Hull, and we're really excited to start the build out on that and open those extra 650 seats in CTC. So where does that money get spent? In terms of new money, compensation, 20 million. Required increases of about 3.5. This is exciting stuff like healthcare increases and inflation on custodial contracts. The lease, spend on one side, get the revenue on the other. Student-facing, 13.8. We'll spend a fair amount of time on this one, but this is really two big things. Increase in need and growth of special education within Chesterfield County, as well as growth in and SOQ requirements for English language learners within Chesterfield County. There's a few other things in there, but those are the big items in there. You'll also see on this page the pre-K adjustment as well as a shared service adjustment. As we went through and worked with Matt and county partners, they were able to identify just under $500,000 of savings that we could help fill our funding gap through some adjustments in the shared service allocation. So thank you, Mr. Harris, for that, and we'll continue to appreciate that as we go forward. So again, $40 million plus sounds like a lot of money, but when you first 20 million of that is invested in compensation. That's what a 3% raise cost. That was the amount requested from the state. We've heard other surrounding districts offering more. We're able to offer 3%. At this point in time, I'll have another slide on that, so I'll come back to that in a moment. In terms of the other items, nothing terribly exciting here. These are nuts and bolts budgets. Health and dental insurance, we're assuming, like the county, 5% increase coming in January. Custodial contract, about a 5% escalator in their contracts that we'll have to pay next year. Technology services, this shows up in a couple different places, but similar escalators in contracts for things like Chromebook support and network switches and things like that that are really just inflationary in nature. And the last item, about $1.85 million for the lease at Springline. As we went through our school process, those were the items that were largely afforded based on that initial $15 million offer from you all at the county, plus that governor's budget. We spent a lot of time saying we need to fill other gaps, and I'll talk about those in just one moment. But before I do that, that $20 million in compensation shows up as a 3% increase, at least 3% for all employees. The step scale, which are largely your teacher and school level administrators, that shows up as giving them the step that they've earned, plus a 2% adjustment in their scale or COLA adjustment. For the graded range, that looks like a 3% increase to their pay. For our minimum wage, that moves our minimum wage to $14.70 an hour, up from $14.42. And others, like instructional aides, don't fit in either of those buckets neatly, another just under $1.5 million to offer them at least, it says at least a 3% raise. Their steps are a little bit bigger than 1%, so offering them that full step plus the 2% cost of living leaves them a little bit north of 3%. Not as high as 4, but it's 3 point something, depending on where you are in the scales for those other positions. As we've mentioned, we've got a longer-term goal for those teachers to get to a $60,000 minimum salary. This puts us to about $55,000 where we stand now. And the graded range, that $14.70, we've got a stated goal to get to $16 an hour. As I said, we're not there on each of them, but we appreciate each step we can take. We recognize that getting to that levels of that $60,000 and that $16 would cost an additional $65 million. I don't have that growing in my money tree. We'd love for that to rain from the sky, but we recognize that that's something we're going to have to work for over the next few years. Now we're looking at what we're talking about as the superintendent's proposed additional school needs. These were the items that, as we were working through our budget process and talking to the community, we did not have line of sight to funding. This is where the additional funding from the General Assembly is largely targeted in our budget and able to meet these needs of the schools. And as you look at this list, you'll see that none of these are necessarily optional in nature either. I'll have a slide on each the special ed and ELL options, so I'll talk about those as part of a second slide. But some of these other items on here, communities and schools, is a long-standing relationship we have with that organization to provide wraparound services for students in need. This is part of that agreement is we add a site each year and they fundraise and they provide an extra, another site. This is a buy one, get one free, money well spent opportunity here with our communities and schools group. The other needs here looks like more of that inflationary items that we didn't have line of sight to when we put the budget together. Fleet and fuel. Our bus fleet continues to age. We appreciate the support of the Board of Supervisors to continue to help us modernize that fleet. It still costs more to service them as things go forward, about $1.2 million of an increase there. Other inflation, waste service contracts, things like that, little things that add up to about $200,000. Technology equipment and replacement schedule. This roughly $500,000 is carrying a lot of weight here. We have a roughly $10 to $11 million backlog of technology replacement cycle needs across the district. These are things that range from everything from staff laptops to PA systems in the schools to other classroom technology as you look around. What this first $500,000 on that journey to fill that bucket is really a few laptops, but mostly replacing 5 intercom systems at schools where, quite frankly, they're at end of life and obsolete, and if it ever breaks, we cannot physically purchase the parts to repair. So we need to get in and make those needed adjustments there. And the last item on here is mega trailers. For you and for the folks that are listening, this is not new mega trailer leases. This is to fund existing leases. We've historically been funding these roughly 50-50 from ongoing operations and other sources, whether that be year-end funds, pandemic monies, other things like that. As that money is largely dried up, we need to find an ongoing source of funding for those existing mega trailers, and that's what that $600,000 reflects. Now, the big numbers, I skipped it. Big numbers on here is the special education number, just under 10 million related to special education. There's two high-level things going on here. One, continued growth in number and severity of special education students. Just looking at count, in 2020, we had about 8,100 students identified with special education needs. Last year was about 8,700 and continuing to grow even further this year. Most of that growth is really captured in that first bullet in terms of increased caseload. This will show up as 6 additional teachers and 28 IAs to help service those students across their spectrum. The other versions are also versions of the continued growth, but also starts to layer in the more expensive services when we can't afford to hire folks at Chesterfield County who have higher paying opportunities in the private sector. But we are required via their IEPs to meet those needs, so we have to go out to those private sector and pay consulting rates on those services. That shows up in speech language therapy, that shows up in nursing support specifically on this page, but also in other areas across special ed, but those two are the big ones that we'll highlight here. The other big number, that 2 million in the middle of the page, 50 additional instructional aids to support one-on-one opportunities for kids. As those severity increases, we need to lean into additional support for those kids with those higher needs so that we can maintain sort of cohesion in the classroom, and quite frankly, can keep them in our classrooms so they're not ultimately required to go to other third-party private day, which would be an even bigger number if we don't lean into additional behavioral support on these folks.
And Bob, I appreciate that point. So I want to take it back to the very first bullet and emphasize the same. You may think that 2.1 for 6 sped teachers and 28 special ed aides is maybe the juice isn't worth the squeeze. This too is an effort to create additional ADP and IDPs, so those intensive day and autism day programs, such that we do not have to send students to private placement, and we can keep them here where they belong in Chesterfield and at a lower cost than private day placement.
Thank you, Dr. Murray.
Mr. Chair, I had a question.
Oh, please.
The increase in students, are they coming in at all different grade levels, or are they coming in primarily in first grade, second grade? Are we coming? We have a lot of people moving here that are bringing kids with them that need the special needs, or I mean, what's that number look like?
I don't think I've looked at that specifically, so I think I'll have to sort of get back to you on the specific number, but clearly we've seen more at the elementary level. I can't quantify exactly how much or whether that's in proportion. I'll have to get back to you.
I mean, I think it's important for us to, as a community, to look, in the kids that are in and you talked about pre-K from age 3 to 4, out in the community. I mean, by gauging that, it'll actually give us an opportunity to look into the future to see what these increases are going to look like as we move forward. We can't gauge that for people who move here from somewhere else, but people are already here who are already having to work with their I have an autistic brother, so we knew when he was 3, right? So it gives us and you a better chance to predict these things in the future, so we can work towards making sure you have the funding for teachers for this and the funding needed to support it. So I'm just curious as to how you're modeling that or tracking it, and if there's any help we can do to help you with that. Even reach out to the community, and of course, there are and I'll just tell you, in Ettrick, we don't have pre-K down there. We need it. right? So if we have special need kids down in Ettrick right now, you don't know about them. You won't know about them until they hit the elementary school.
Right.
But if we had pre-K down there for them, like we have in other parts of the county, well, then we would know it. So
Yeah.
just, if we need any help in that area, we'll be more than happy to help.
Yeah.
The only other thing I would offer to your question, Mr. Carroll, is we've noticed a considerable uptick in identification post-COVID. So you think about the learning loss there, mental health concerns and issues, and all of the contributors because of that event has led us to seeing a significant increase. And then you couple that with some transient population, but here again, a modest growth. I feel confident that the majority have always been ours.
Mr. Chair, just to speak to that, I know I'm about to climb into the weeds a little bit because I understand special ed, but just understand that the psychological evaluations is one for when they're little kids, which is called the WIPSI, and then it moves to the WISC, and then ultimately moves to the WACE. And so when you're putting together an IEP, there are three components. You have the psychological, you have the educational, and you have the sociological. So over time, things can reveal themselves because of COVID or anything like that. So initially, the student may not have been identified, and then what occurs is that as the psychological evaluations, you're always compared to your peers. So it's whenever you're going through the different phases, if you are in preschool or if you're still, so really the cutoff is you're going to get one somewhere around kindergarten, and then another one at 6, and then another one at 12. So because of that, you're always being approved, always with your peers, then you can measure when you've fallen behind, and then at that point, through a Woodcock-Johnson or through a sociological, what's happening in your family. All of those components can mean that you couldn't necessarily know it or not be able to identify it at one age, but then it becomes so much more identifiable. Add on to that the mental health, and it could be anything from ADHD or something else, and then you can identify it at that point. So sometimes it takes a little while for it to reveal itself. It's not necessarily someone coming in from the outside.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Moving forward. The other big area of increase here is with respect to our English language learner population. There's two dynamics at play here. The first is, I'll start at the bottom bullet, where you can see there's been about 2,200 increase since FY24 into what is projected for FY26, so a pretty big increase in population here. Couple that with the change in the state's SOQ requirements, which you can see in the middle of the page there. Happy to say that Chesterfield County has largely been ahead of the shift in higher staffing ratios for ELL students for those in the levels 1 through 4. We didn't do it exactly like this. We had it bucketed a little differently, but largely met the spirit of 1 through 4, so we were ahead of the curve on that. However, the new item here is that level 5 plus population. These are the students who are in monitoring status for English language learner capabilities, et cetera. That wasn't something we were monitoring it. We knew the number of kids, but it wasn't something we were explicitly staffing for. With this new ratio and across the district, roughly 30 of these 43 FTEs are really driven by that 100-to-1 ratio by itself there. So you look at this 4 million. If you remember, I talked earlier about the 12 million from the governor. About 2 of that was to help support this particular growth. So again, another good example of state mandates equaling about half the funding for this particular initiative. The last slide I won't dwell on. Dr. Murray talked a little bit about this before. We have needs that go beyond this. I mentioned one of them with respect to compensation and getting to those $16 and $60,000 salary levels. Operations, you hear about major maintenance, you hear about things like that, as well as additional staffing and student needs. We have a long list behind this, as I'm sure every department that will talk to you today does, and we're really excited to continue to partner with you as we go forward to make additional progress on this particular set of longer-term longer-term needs, and happy to dive into any of those as we go forward or at other points in time. So with that, I'll pause for a moment to flip over to the capital improvement plan. Again, as we talked about earlier, no new projects on our list this year. We continue to highlight the three new, the West Area L, Dale Area L, and Old 100 Area Elementary Schools, and 3 replacement of A.M. Davis, Bensley, and Grange Hall. A new middle school, Deep Creek, we're excited to open that one really soon, and a replacement of Midlow Middle, as well as a reno of Matoka Middle, and the high school project of the West Area High, as well as the expansion of Thomasdale 9 and the renovation of the Bird Gym are the big projects that continue to move forward in our CIP. We also continue to fund major maintenance, $9 million transfer. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in the broader major maintenance category. And this year, we're also looking to include a Chromebook lease as part of our CIP going forward. I talked about these projects very briefly, but excited to open Deep Creek and the new A.M. Davis in August of this year. Excited also year behind that for the Bensley and West Area Elementary Schools, and recently finished bidding and ready to move forward on the West Area High School project, which will be slated to open in August of 2027. The other items in previous years, we like to put these in blocks and say when we're going to start them and when we're going to finish them. This year, we're choosing to put them in as a list and really highlight that bullet sitting at the bottom there, which basically says, the timing and priority of these are dependent on ultimately funding, site identification, and the collective will of the Board of Supervisors and School Board. And we'll continue to work closely with you to close some of the funding gap we see from the inflation since the pandemic era, as well as meeting these needs that we have laid out in our CIP in previous years and continue to strive for here. The other big piece of our CIP is major maintenance funding. We've established a run rate, thanks in large part to support from the Board of Supervisors in years past, as well as pandemic-era funding to essentially spend roughly a $30 million level. We're well funded to meet that level in both FY25, this current year, as well as FY26, but the bank account starts to run dry when we get into FY27, and we'll need to continue to partner here as well to maintain at least that level. You saw major maintenance on my other needs for the district. $30 million is a great level. We can do a lot of good things with that. I think we could do a lot more great things and keep our buildings even better shape if that number was increased to higher levels as well. And the last thing I'll talk about here briefly is the addition of a Chromebook lease. We've had these in years past. We didn't have a Chromebook lease payment last year and this year as the current lease expired, but what that has led to is over the last few years, we've shifted our Chromebook policy to be one-to-one, and we've also done that through various funding sources, including pandemic ESSER-type funding to fill that need. What that's left us with is a bit of a Frankenstein fleet of Chromebooks, a bunch of different models that look and smell different, which makes servicing more challenging, which makes getting the Chromebook back in the kids' hands more challenging, and quite frankly, given the age of them, they're running on fumes as well. So it was time to look at additional needs for our Chromebook fleet. Our new Chief Technology Officer came in, jumped right in, and proposed a Chromebook lease to replenish that fleet, to provide some cost certainty with respect to servicing of these devices, and quite frankly, improve the overall service level of the fleet by having essentially same model for all the kids across the district. So we're really excited about this one as we move forward. And I'll pause. I think I see a question.
Chair. I think it's important for the community to understand part of that is some of these older Chromebooks, is that a Windows operating system on there?
It's Chrome, Google Chrome.
Okay, Google Chrome, okay.
Yeah.
But, so Windows 10, Windows 11 doesn't affect?
It does not.
That's good.
Yes. Awesome. Well, oddly enough, that's where I was planning on ending this, but thank you very much for your support. I look forward to engaging with you in the community as we go forward as well. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Murray for any other closing thoughts.
Good job, Bob.
Great job, Mr. Superintendent. One question. What are your expectations as asked earlier regarding ETRIC, for example, for pre-K, we know that early education is a game changer, and we know it makes a difference. So where are we I know we have Harrogate, but where are we contemplating or planning for the future relative to ETRIC, for example, and of course, this area in Dale, where we have some kids that could probably benefit from pre-K?
So I'll bite that off into chunks.
Yes,
Dale
sir.
and Matoaka, Ettrick
right.
corridor. We looked at the numbers early on this summer, I want to say, to see if there was a robust need out in the Ettrick corridor. And we only had 3 classrooms between Ettrick and Matoaka Elementary that were pre-K by design. Not saying there's not a larger need there, but to consider repurposing a facility out that way where we only had 3 classrooms worth of need felt irresponsible, and that we should shift our focus to where there was more consolidated need. Turnover to the Dale District.
Yes, sir.
Real quick on that
Yep.
point, what you're saying is we're already servicing those students in our current classrooms, and we don't have a lack of space to be able to do that. So that's why you're looking at not making a change, right? We are already servicing all of the people
Through
that
Title I.
Through Title I, yes.
Okay.
So we have
That's what he just.
we have Head Start and VPI and Title I. Kind of, you don't have to be at CECLA to have your pre-K need satisfied.
Okay. It's good to know.
Why is the community coming to me telling me that the kids down there are not in pre-K? Why do I have people from the Concerned Citizens of Ettrick talking about it just Monday night to both myself
I would
and
send them
Steve?
to me so that I can get them to the real numbers and information and have a very candid dialogue. And I had this with the Concerned Citizens of Ettrick in my previous position. Maybe not to the extent that there were classrooms. My understanding then was that there were some classrooms that they were invited to use at the time, and then that went away, and that presented the issue because there was a lack of teacher credentialing, and that was a requirement.
Right.
Yeah.
But their argument is that there are still plenty of kids down there that are pre-K that are not in a classroom.
I could look and see what type of wait list there might be, but to say that it's of great significance, I've never heard that
Okay.
outside of that particular narrative from that group.
Well, I would really like to get the numbers so we could present it to them, to know one way or the other what the need is or what the need is not.
Yep, happy to do that.
But the pervasive message in the community is they're not getting served. And if they are, then I want to be able to show it.
Yep.
That's a great point.
Well, and as an example, CECLA services 13 of our elementary schools, and we're able to free up classroom space by not having pre-K exist there. So when you think about overcrowding and trailers, all of these are contributors. So we do have pre-K in our elementary schools that are not attending CECLA. And that's why we've been having the conversation around a second early childhood academy in the Dale area because of the extensive need out of Falling Creek and Hopkins and Beulah and Chalkley and Jacobs.
And Bensley.
And Henning and Bensley.
Benzel as well. Great. That's in need. In addition, let me finish up. One more question. And that was in regards to your future needs that you had mentioned with operations. What do you see as the most pressing need for the coming school year, fiscal year 26? What do you see as the most pressing need for your school system, academically or in terms of resources or capital or operations?
Well, I'll let Bob answer for himself because our answers might be different. We are closely watching the General Assembly pertaining to a sunset clause of long-term substitutes, which post-COVID, when we were seeing a mass teacher exit, they extended the 90-day long-term substitute to 180 days. So now we weren't breaking or pulling a teacher out of the classroom at the midpoint, only to then put a new substitute in there for the rest. And so we were breaking that continuity when the teacher pipeline was pretty dried up. And so you weren't magically going to find the teacher that you couldn't find 5 months prior to. Well, if the governor vetoes the extension of that 180 days that has come out of the House and the Senate, but there is some pressure being applied for him to consider vetoing that, we would lose 200, or we would have 200 vacancies out of the gate in addition to what we would normally expect. And I want to say that our goal and desire is to put fully certified teachers in our classrooms. That's number one. But sometimes you can't do that. As an example, last year, Virginia colleges and universities only graduated around 70 people certified to teach secondary math. Well, that doesn't mean that they are going to work in education. It doesn't mean they're going to live in Chesterfield, much less the Commonwealth. And then they become the most competitive teacher on the market. We could fill 40 of those 70 vacancies tomorrow. So we've had to be very creative. And what we do, we've had significant success with our substitutes and bringing them in, getting them pulled in as an annual substitute, which then makes them eligible for a subsidized licensure pathway. We have all but doubled the amount of substitutes to fully or provisionally licensed teachers to date this year that we did in our entirety of the last school year. Significant, triple digits. So that's what I see. But we also know that pay attracts, culture retains. So it kind of goes hand in glove.
Excellent.
Thank you, Dr. Murray. I would echo everything he said on teacher
Okay.
retention and recruitment. I think that's clearly top of the list. But I'll add on to that with respect to operations monies. You did not see a big number in here for continuing to invest in our ongoing operations, major maintenance, bus fleet, those type of initiatives. We just didn't have dollars to allocate to them, so it's going to be another year of doing the same with the same as things continue to increase. So in addition to everything Dr. Murray said, I will not contradict that in one bit, but I would add in the need to continue to fund the operations to ensure that we maintain our buildings and get our kids to school in a clean and safe bus as well.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that the governor has this bill probably in front of him to sign or veto. Also, I would like to mention the newly promoted Deputy Superintendent, Dr. High. Would you stand so that they can see you? Deputy Superintendent, I hope I'm in order, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I heard that earlier.
Emailing people to get these answers.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I just want to make sure we saw her as well. So thank you all for their time. We appreciate. Great job.
So I was at a legislative update last night with 4 of our local electeds, and one of them was very pointed at pushing us under a bus about we need to fund more in the local level for our schools. And I said, and then the other one, one of the other ones brought up the JLARC study, which I'm just, because as I'm sitting here like, hello, call on me when I ask about the JLARC study. So I just think it's sometimes about perception and about, who's pushing who under the bus. But if we're missing $250 million of funding and they're, I realize that they're giving us more funding and they took the cap off this year. And so hopefully we'll get, more than what we have. That's still 13 million is nowhere near 250 million. So that's 64 schools is a lot of schools to take care of. Let's just put it that way. So we really try to do the best we can. And I think we do a lot of offsetting sometimes with our diff funds and stuff as well to help out with those types of needs as well. So let's hope we get more money from the state.
Well, and I appreciate you making that comment, Ms. Schneider, because I should have mentioned early on when I was saying how the budget is a year-round process, that the community kind of laser focuses in on this process where we're partnered very outwardly to arrive at our operating budget for next year, when really it should be fully acknowledged that the Board of Supervisors does present and provide along the way each month one-off needs, unique things. DIF is a great example of that, but there are other times that we've had to hold our hand out and y'all have come through. So, and that's absent the budget process proper. I just think it's important for the community to know.
Yes.
Well, thank you both, Dr. Murray and Mr. Meister. You made a really good point. I just want to really emphasize it. Pay attracts, culture retains. It reminded me of a situation where our daughter, 5 years ago, was going, or even 6, was going through Math Sci. Here is the penultimate #1 Math Sci program that could not hold a physics teacher and could not take physics because that teacher wasn't there. And I think it really gets to the point of math and sci, and to be able to hold on to those teachers was very, very important. And they're the ones that are the most pursued. So I think you just made a great point, and we lived that firsthand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think Ms. Schneider brought up a good point. You know, there are other ways that we try and make sure that we can fill in the blanks for you throughout the year. And I get a lot of requests in my district. I got 3 high schools and a bunch of schools. And I think we're also working on, because there were some questions at the last board meeting we had about tennis courts. And I think we're going to talk about that and what we're trying to do to solve that problem, because we know we have 4 tennis courts that need to be replaced. You know, we replaced Cosby High School's tennis courts last year. And so, yeah, I think that sometimes that's missed by the community, other than the one school or the parents that are involved in that particular issue. You know, like we just redid, and I know you and I talked about this, the outdoor locker rooms at Cosby High School just got a renovation inside, and it looks absolutely spectacular, and we're getting ready to do Manchester. So, you know, we're going to continue to do the best that we can to support you in that need, and then also continue to advocate, like Ms. Schneider talked about, with the General Assembly to get this DLARC study funded and put us in a better position. And then, you know, quite frankly, and it's not an immediate thing that's going to happen, but hopefully in the future, with some of these big companies we have coming into Chesterfield that will be providing jobs for our children in the future, highly technical skill jobs, but also additional tax dollars on a commercial base that will hopefully put us in a position to help with some of these needs in the future as well. It's not an immediate, I know, but I think we've done very well to bring and bringing more companies in like we've never had before. I know I didn't see it in my 32 years as a police officer to see what we have coming in now. And, you know, when Lego comes out of the ground and some of these other ones, there's going to be an opportunity for the board to not just cut the tax rate, but to also have additional monies to fund some of these needs. So we're working on it.
Well, before the JLARC study came out, I felt like the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, you did.
I, for several years, was saying what the JLARC study said publicly to no avail. I felt like I was shouting in the woods to nobody. To Ms. Coker's credit, we had some great conversations, and through those conversations, I believe, which I've shared before, that we were able to come to a better understanding of both sides. The county, me as a board of supervisors member, understanding schools' concerns and why they were saying what they were saying, and vice versa. And that's helped tremendously. I can't thank our staff and school staff and the school board enough for changing the narrative in the community, because for many years the state's been able to laugh at us and say to people, oh, you just need to tell your locality to pay more, when we're already paying more than what the state their LCI would say we should be paying. Now, I think we're right funding schools. I don't think we're overpaying. I think we're paying what we should be, but the state is definitely underfunding, and that's what I've been saying. And to have schools get in the boat with us and row with us instead of shooting at us has been just a tremendous change for our citizens. So much to the point that I heard Dr. Casey say that somebody said to him, well, y'all must have passed a 2-year budget because we're not hearing anything from schools this year. And that's because we're working together. And I cannot thank you all enough for being able to work together on this issue. And I'm sorry that the county's still having to fund over 650 teachers, 100% of their salary, and over 900 of employees, including those teachers in the classroom, 100% of their salary, because the state won't fund any of it because they say we don't need those teachers to be able to run our schools. And I don't think our citizens truly comprehend how much of a lack of funding the state has, which would solve the issues that schools is facing. So to have somebody at the state level to say the localities just need to fund more is really scary to me that anybody would think that. But at least another state member stood up and said, wait a minute, we got a mirror to look at. And I appreciate that person standing up and saying that, because it's important that at the state level they understand the unfunded mandates, especially on schools, but also on local government, put us in these predicaments and make it very hard for us when it comes time to have the next discussion, which we're about to have for the budget on the county level. And again, to your point, this system is so broken. There's no way schools should go first. The state should go first, the county should go second, and schools should go third, and schools should be at the table for all of those discussions. But that's the way it should work, and it works opposite. That's state law. We need to work on that together as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of get to that point. You know, a surplus is only a surplus when the bills have been paid. And where I have difficulty is when we end up on the state level not taking that into account. A surplus is only a surplus when the bills have been paid, and the bills need to be paid for our schools.
We just really appreciate y'all's support, and thank you for this time.